Okay, and what we want to do in this video is list out the 9 different generally accepted benefits of international trade, the benefits of engaging in both importing and exporting, buying and selling goods and services in countries where they were not made. Now, the very first one, and I want to stress before we start that the vast majority of the rest of the benefits essentially stem from this. So don't think that they're all in isolation. Please understand they're massively linked to each other. And it's actually rather difficult to explain one without referring to others. So if I seem to repeat myself, please do forgive me. Now, what we are saying is that when a country initially opens up, let's say, to international trade, the companies that are selling goods and services in that country are now having to compete with more goods that were produced from different countries. So they're not only having to compete against domestic firms, they're now having to compete against both domestic and international firms. What they have to do, what competing means is that you have to convince voluntarily consumers in your market, let's just say it's just for the moment, to buy your goods over everybody else's. Now, if more and more people are trying to convince consumers to voluntarily give up their cash, part with their money in order to buy their goods that they produced, if there are more sellers giving different goods to that end, well then each firm has to get better at what it does. Okay, now that's really true. So therefore, if firms wish for customers to voluntarily choose their goods, they need to produce a greater variety of goods, serving the customers, or goods of better quality, and I'm talking about services, or at lower prices. That's how you convince somebody, hey, buy my stuff. It's better, we've got new stuff available that nobody else has, and it's cheaper, all right? It is the extra competition faced by these firms as a result of engaging in international trade. Right? If you shut it off now, there would be less competition and these firms would be under less pressure to satisfy you, the customer. Right? That it's this increase in competition as a result of international trade which forces all firms in the market to strive to greater efficiency in production as well, by the way, in order to satisfy their customers. Now, why is efficiency in production important? It is important because if you become more efficient, your cost of production, the amount of money that you pay to produce a good, falls on average. That means that one of two things occurs. Either, if a firm always wants to do that, because if they just continue to sell at the same price with lower costs, they're making more profit per good sold. However, as a result of competition, we have already said that in order to convince people to buy your good, you must be selling at a lower price than your competitors. So if there's increased competition, there's increased incentive and need in order for the firm to survive, in order for the firm not to go bankrupt, to take these cost reductions, these efficiency increases, same thing, and pass them on to the consumer in terms of lower prices. So again, the incentives as a result of increased competition are a greater variety of goods, lower prices, greater quality, and greater efficiency, which in turn can lead to lower prices. Now, all of this are the incentives as a result of increased competition, because if they don't convince consumers to voluntarily buy their goods and services, they will go out of business. If you don't make enough sales to cover your costs, you stop existing as a business. So, yes, I've said all that, excuse me. And I've said, I might as well just repeat myself. Competition increases efficiency as firms have to operate cheaper than their competitors in order to attract consumers to buy their products. International trade increases competition, because there's more firms selling, as domestic firms now need to compete with foreign firms and not just domestic firms. This should lead to greater efficiency and may mean that consumers gain by receiving less expensive goods and services, as increased competition tends to lead to lower prices, and it does. So that is increased competition, but there are 4 elements of that. Greater variety of choices, or goods are incentivized, and better quality goods are incentivized, lower prices are incentivized, and a more efficient use of the existing factors of production, a greater efficiency in production. Now, lower prices. Now, this is very true. The main benefit from international trade is the ability to buy goods and services at lower prices than the domestic one. If the goods that you are importing are selling at a higher price than the domestic one, well then, at least in terms of prices, you have no reason to import it. Now, you may have other reasons, which we'll talk about in a second, down. But right now, you have no reason to import the goods that sell for a higher price in other countries. The reason being, it won't have a competitive advantage, which is different to a comparative advantage. Domestic consumers, but the goods that you choose to import, that people import, are the ones that they can produce cheaper and sell cheaper in the importing country's market. They are the only ones that come into the country and as such would have the effect of lowering prices. Domestic consumers can enjoy an increase in real income, therefore, by potentially securing more goods and services at lower prices than domestic prices. And how is this done? Through imports, because you're only, at least in this question or in this benefit, you're only looking at the lower prices. Now, also firms can potentially enjoy higher profits. Now, how? Well, we said lower prices. Well, we talked about consumers, but firms may be able to secure resources, factors of production, raw materials at lower prices than could be produced in the domestic economy. So that allows them to get greater efficiency, which is average cost, spend less money producing each good on average, and as such, that can allow them to do one of two things: either lower their prices or earn a higher profit. Okay, now this is just kind of repeating myself again, but consumers can buy less expensive goods than would otherwise be available if they were to rely solely on domestic production. This causes an increase in real GDP. Producers may buy less expensive raw materials and partly manufactured goods. This can also cause prices to fall, as this too causes an increase in real income of the consumer and an increase in profit of the producer. So let's have a reminder of ourselves of some of the definitions that we looked at in the last video. International trade, which is trade that involves the exports and imports of goods or services between countries. Free trade. This is what we're talking about, the benefits of free trade, right? International trade that is not subject to any kind of trade barriers, such as tariff or quotas. Right, well, international trade is made up of exports and imports. So what are exports? Goods and services produced in one country and purchased by consumers in another country. What are imports? The value of goods and services purchased domestically that are produced abroad. Right, now let's look at number 3, which is greater choice. International trade allows consumers to enjoy a wider array of different types of goods and services. I will continue. They are not confined by the limits of the production from the domestic firms, but can now enjoy all the produce the world has to offer. This ensures a higher standard of living that could not have been realised without international trade. Now, where do we get our enjoyment from in economics? From consuming goods and services. Okay, that's the theory at least. If we have more or newer or different stuff that we do not produce in the domestic country but can be enjoyed, consumed through imports, well then we will have a higher standard of living. We get to consume more of different types of goods that we could not otherwise consume. So that means that there is a greater choice available to the consumer, and as such are better off. This allows consumers to find better goods and services that satisfy their needs and wants, or better satisfy their needs and wants, right? Producers have greater choice in terms of raw materials that they can purchase, which may allow them to produce different or better products than they otherwise would without international trade. And again, allowing for greater choice for domestic consumers. Either we get the direct consumer goods, or we get the resources necessary to produce other consumer goods that we couldn't otherwise do. Now, this is another thing. So, as I said, I'm Irish, but I'm currently living in Mongolia. And one thing that Mongolia has huge amounts of is coal, minerals, copper, lithium, all that kind of stuff, right? Not every country in the world has that. So, if firms in certain countries want to gain access to these important productive raw materials, and they operate in a country that is not blessed or endowed with these raw materials, that would mean without international trade they could not produce anywhere close to their potential. However, because of international trade, these resources which are not present in their domestic country can be purchased from foreign countries. That means that a much higher standard of living can be lived in both. The exporting country, like Mongolia in this case, can gain revenue, can gain foreign reserves, which we'll talk about in a second, but can gain money through the sale internationally of coal, lithium, copper, which the Mongolian market is so small that it would never be able to make a lot of money because it's only selling to 4 million people. If it's selling to 7 or 8 billion or however we're at the moment, well then that's a much bigger market, and therefore they gain the benefits of this increased revenue. And the importing country can now its power plants can now receive the materials necessary to produce lithium batteries and so on, and therefore sell those internationally to countries that don't have the expertise to produce them themselves. Now, that's essentially it in as short as I can make it, but I will go through this here. So, different countries possess different resources in varying amounts. There may be firms in one country which need certain resources to produce their product which are not present in that country. One way that firms operating in a country can gain access to the resources they need is through international trade. In order to earn foreign currency required to purchase these imports, firms in the domestic country must sell their goods to the foreign market. Now, I've already defined these, but basically Mongolia gets access to dollars if it sells resources to American firms, and then they can then use these dollars to buy American-made goods. Now, it's not exactly that, but it's close, and I will talk more about it in a second. Now, listen to this. Singapore is an example of a developed country that has, almost no natural resources. It even needs to import water. However, it has companies that can produce high-valued manufactured goods, which allow it to import the raw materials that it needs from different countries, right? So understand that. This slide here is meant to explain what I've just said here. So Singapore creates something of value, it imports stuff and uses those things that it imports to make something of even better value. Imports and exports, there's no such thing as one of them is always good, one of them is always bad. Now, as I've already said, source of foreign exchange. So when you sell something, when Mongolian firms sell something to consumers in America or sell something to producers in America, I'm only going Mongolia, America at the moment, they earn dollars. They can use those dollars in order to buy American-made goods. That is a good thing because there are many goods that are made in America that we here in Mongolia do not make. When Mongolian firms sell goods to Irish consumers or Irish firms, that means that they earn euros. They can then take those euros and buy goods that are made in, France, Spain, Greece, any of the euro-using countries. All right, that is good for Mongolians because it's good for both. It's good for Irish people because they get access to materials that we don't have in Ireland and can use them to produce even better goods. And it's good for Mongolians because that means that they get euro currency and as such get access to goods and services that are produced within the Eurozone that they don't produce themselves. It is a win-win situation. Okay, now, when countries export, they get paid with foreign currencies. Just think of it that way for now, all right? It's not exactly true. They can use this foreign currency to buy imports from other countries. Acquiring foreign exchange, which foreign currencies from selling exports abroad, increases a country's ability to import. Now, I really should have said this at the start, and I apologize. There is no such thing as Mongolia Incorporated. There is no such thing as India Incorporated. What is happening, and I have said this, is that consumers in one country are buying goods and services that were made in another country, right? So when you hear Ireland exports X amount per year, what that means is that firms operating in Ireland sell goods and services that were produced in Ireland to consumers in other countries within that year. I hope that makes sense. So what we're saying is the people that are exporting get access to the foreign currency, and that means that they can buy foreign produced goods. But what in reality they do is put it into the bank and it's exchanged. Now, this is another cracker. I have to give my own country of birth another big up, I suppose. Access to larger markets, right? Now, this is Kerrygold on the right. What Kerrygold is grass-fed Irish butter. It has a huge recognition and brand power all around the world. And what I've noticed more and more is that people, like kind of these fitness influencers, are constantly talking about grass-fed Irish butter, and they're literally always talking about Kerrygold. Okay, so let's say access to larger markets. I shall explain this by way of an example. If firms in Ireland are best in the world at producing butter, for example, whether it's true in your opinion or not is irrelevant, this is what we are saying is true. Without international trade, Irish dairy or butter producers can only sell to the domestic consumers. It can only sell to Irish people, people in Ireland at least. So that's about, 5 million people for the whole island. So Ireland being a very small market means that they have very few customers. The industry can only expand so much. However, if we have international trade, right, which is literally billions of people, well then, in theory, or it is possible at least, that Irish dairy producers can reach a larger customer base. They can literally try to satisfy the needs of 9 billion consumers. Right? I don't know how many of those eat or use butter, but still, I'm just saying it's at least theoretically possible. So, if a certain country's industry is selling to a small population that is indigenous or domestic to that industry can only grow to the size of its customers in its domestic country. However, if they are allowed to export, that industry can absolutely boom. And by increasing the level of production of goods and services, firms are able to achieve what are called economies of scale. I'll come to that later, which leads to higher levels of profit and the creation of jobs in the long term. It can turn a country around. And this is what I'm saying. Hence, greater access to larger markets also helps to tackle the problems of poverty. It can literally turn a country around. Now, economies of scale is rather potentially difficult. And again, in an effort to keep these videos rather short, I'm trying to be as sparse as possible with my words. Okay, so I want you to understand this, that up to a certain point, as a firm produces more output, right? As a firm increases the amount of output it produces per day, per week, per year, this allows them to reduce the average cost of production in the long run. This allows them, and this causes an increase in efficiency, which allows them to produce an individual unit at a lower cost. Now, let's look at the definition for the moment of economies of scale. Falling average costs that a firm experiences when it increases its scale of operations. Okay, now let's think about this. As a firm, right, it wants to produce more and more units every day, week, year. It will need to change its production process. So instead of producing by hand, it will start to use some machines. Now think of Coca-Cola, the soft drink company. When they started out, I'm assuming it was just one person. I could be wrong, but one person in his bathtub. All right? Now they have factories that have some of the most technologically advanced machines with some of the best educated engineers and problem solvers trying to improve the efficiency of what they do. So a more mechanized process, greater and better educated labour, the ability to bulk buy raw materials at a lower cost because they are buying them in such vast quantities, reduces the average cost of production. That will only work because it is dependent on producing large quantities. Otherwise, there's no point in trying to produce these large quantities if you won't sell them. So therefore, access to larger markets allows a greater scale of production. You produce on a larger scale, and as such you can enjoy the increased efficiencies that come with large-scale production, which represent themselves as lower costs. These lower costs are called economies of scale. The reduction in average cost caused by an increase in the scale of operation of a firm. So, if you want to be in a better position to ensure lower average costs, more efficient production as a result of a more mechanized and larger scale of production, well, you need access to larger markets in order to do that. International trade allows an Irish producer to go from only servicing 5 million people to potentially servicing 9 billion. It is the access to international trade, it is free trade, that it allows for a more efficient production method in many different countries. And that's what essentially economies of scale are. I get asked a lot in class, are these to do with countries? No, economies of scale is the name given to the reasons for the reduction in average cost as output expands in size. A few of these reasons I have already mentioned: greater and more efficient technology, better educated workforce, reduction in the price of raw materials or the cost of raw materials as a result of bulk buying in such large quantities. All of these allow firms to produce each individual unit at a lower price, or a lower cost, Now, this is what economies of scale are, and this reduction of average cost of production leads to greater profits and the creation of employment in the long run. That's a benefit. Access to larger markets, which is a result of engaging in free international trade, allows firms to sell to more customers, mechanise and improve its production processes, reduces average cost in the long run, increase profits, create jobs, and produce more efficiently, which thus reduces poverty. At the very least, it leads into number 2, which is lower prices, and lower prices increase real income of consumers. Okay, all of these are connected, and I know I've been talking for a lot. Maybe I should have split it up into 2, but I'm not going to do that now. Okay, the 8th benefit is a more efficient allocation of the world's resources. Well, let's really think about this. What does that mean? It means the world's resources should go to those producers who are most efficient at producing goods and services that consumers want at a price that they are willing to pay. Okay? That's what a correct allocation of society's scarce resources involves. Let's think about this. So if you're in a country, and we're not talking about international trade now, right? We're just saying a country, an economy that's based on markets, right? Markets tend to have an effect on the efficiency of allocation of scarce resources, let's say. That is, they tend to result in efficiency. Markets and market forces, the SIRA, the 4 functions of prices, which are signalling, incentives, rationing, and the allocation of scarce resources. So within an economy, within a country, right, we assume and believe that markets are pretty good at allowing an efficient allocation of resources, particularly in markets that do not suffer from the existence of externalities. Now, if that is true, if markets within a country are best at making sure that resources go to those that are best or most efficient at using them, producing goods and services that people are willing to and able to buy, and charging a price that people are willing and able to pay. Imagine how much better each country would be if they acted as a single economic unit. If we reduced all trade barriers and said, whatever country you're from or whatever country you want to sell to, you can do that free of charge. That means that the world's resources would better go than what they currently are doing to producers that are the most efficient at using these resources to produce goods and services that people want at a price that they are willing to pay. Now, the idea of efficiency through markets comes in firms or countries or markets that exist. Markets that are based on the market system. Anyway, however, if a country starts to engage in international trade, it benefits as international trade encourages an efficient allocation of world scarce resources, free and fair. Okay, kind of multilateral trade agreements hope to make a level playing field where everybody, if there are tariffs, and hopefully there aren't, but if there are tariffs, everyone's paying the same on all goods. Something like that. Free and fair international trade forces domestic firms to concentrate on improving the quality of the output and the efficiency of their production due to foreign competition, again improving the allocation of scarce resources for the world economy. Now, the final thing I hear you say, hurrah, okay, efficient world production. Well, for everything that we've said, as a result of increased competition, as a result of the potentiality of gaining access to greater and cheaper resources, as the result of the incentives that occur, that you have to become more efficient in order to reduce your cost of production so that you can reduce your prices in order to incentivize consumers around the world to voluntarily give up their money to buy your goods, to pay the price that you want to charge. Well, as stated stated earlier, increased competition due to international trade provides the incentive for both domestic and foreign firms to compete on price, quality, and consumer choice. Okay, so as a result of this competition, inefficient and unproductive firms become uncompetitive. No one buys their stuff because it's either terrible or it's too expensive, and therefore are forced out of the market. This frees up resources for the efficient firms, who are the only firms to survive this process of entry and exit. Absolutely. If you're not good enough, you won't be in business. This exit from the market of inefficient firms as a result of increased competition caused by increased international trade leaves only efficient firms in the market, resulting in an increase in world productive efficiency. Now let me just check, but ladies and gentlemen, I almost believe we're done. This is very true. For example, international trade means cheaper resources available to domestic firms, which can then lower costs and increase productive efficiency. It's all down to competition. International trade encourages competition. It forces it, essentially. Now, just a quick few roundup of the definitions. I will let you pause it there if you still have the will to carry on and read them yourselves. That, I think, is a very important video in spite of how long it is. I would sincerely and honestly suggest that if you can understand intuitively why I have said the things that I have, I believe everything following this point will be a lot easier. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, it's going to be a lot easier. Please rewatch this video, split it up into different bits, but watch it again until you can explain to your grandmother why these are the benefits of international trade. Guys, thank you so very much. I really hope this helps, and I hope to see you again in the next video.